Good Monday. This is Jay Brew, co-chairman of Seafried and Brew. Have some interesting things to talk about today. As we were preparing my comments on the new capital proposals, I wanted to back up some of the things that I had to say with some statistics. And what we want to do today is run through some of these statistics in terms of net charge-offs. Because as I looked at these numbers, it was very surprising on a number of fronts. And what we're doing is that we're looking at net charge-offs for all community banks between 0 and 5 billion in assets. And as we look at this chart, we can see that there's a lot of different things going on, but let's go into each individual area. We look at net charge-offs to total loans and leases. And you can see as we move through this whole period of time, it was amazing to me that the maximum net charge-offs were 2.21% of total loans and leases, which still overall I did not consider to be that significant of amount, considering what we went through with all the failed banks being factored into here, all of the problems factored in going through the financial crisis and the Great Recession. So to see this was actually very surprising that net charge-offs were as low as what they are, and basically have come down to more being in that 0.13% area as we move into 2012. We look at net charge-offs in construction and development loans. Now this would be to total construction and development loans, and this was where the problem was. We hit a maximum, amazingly enough, of 7.96% as we were moving through 2009, and that is the area that I have the most concern with the new capital proposals, is that there's absolutely nothing that will prevent banks from doing this again. And I have said time after time on these new capital proposals that we need, as a community banking industry, a safety net that would prevent this from ever happening again. When we look at it overall based upon compared to all loans, it does bring it down to a maximum of 0.91%. So a different way to look at it, not quite as severe, but let's look at commercial real estate. And this was the real surprising one to me. When we look at net charge-offs to commercial real estate versus all commercial real estate, we had a high of 1.19%. This being a big concern of the regulators. Gee whiz, you have a lot of commercial real estate loans like we have at my bank, that when we look at our commercial real estate loans, high risk, yet this is a tribute to the community banking industry with the amount of dollars that they have in commercial real estate type loans, that going through the period that we did, getting up to that level fairly minimum. Then we look at net charge-offs of commercial real estate to total gross loans and leases, and this falls to 0.35%, which once again is very insignificant. And we want to compare this to when we look at 1 to 4 family mortgages. And the point that we'll make is the commercial real estate loans very similar to actual net charge-offs on 1 to 4 family homes. When we look at the high compared net charge-offs on 1 to 4 family residential, amazingly enough, we hit a high of 1% in here. So we look at it in terms compared to total loans, like I said, a maximum of 0.29%. So think of it with the new capital proposals, sitting there saying, gee whiz, on single family, you have to take a 50% risk weighting. In fact, going through the worst housing problem we could ever expect in here, look at the level of community banking that they were able to underwrite and only have 0.29% charge-offs versus total loans, 1% compared to all of their 1 to 4 family. Minimal, insignificant. Is this something that deserves a 50% risk weighting? I say no. You could sit there and argue that commercial real estate maybe doesn't deserve 100% risk weighting. But when we look at those construction and development loans, that's a situation where there should be a higher risk weighting because of actual experience. This one was very surprising because if you look at the new capital proposals, this would be a type 2 loan, meaning home equity. The big losses that were taken by the big banks in this area, forcing the new capital rules to sit there and say you need 100% risk base because this is very risky. Well, let's look at home equity to total home equity loans. Once again, a maximum of 1.1%, which, remember, 1 to 4 family was 1%. Right on top of that, once again, it would suggest that community banking had very conservative underwriting standards. And going through the time where you would have had the highest risk on home equity loans, to have this as well as the high in here of total loans at 0.05%. Think of that. Very little risk. Is this really the type of situation where you need 100% risk weighting when you had this minor decline in terms of net charge-offs? Even commercial and industrial in here is that the higher risk area that is always talked about among bankers. Charge-offs to commercial industrial loans total was 2.87% at its high. When you look at it versus all loans, 0.38%. Once again, when we grade management in here and the board of directors of community banks industry-wide, is that I say that there was conservative underwriting practices that resulted in negligible net charge-offs in here. When we look at overall loan mix, though, we've seen a change in here. And that change is that we hit a high of 16.24% in terms of development loans. Look at the downward move industry-wide to 6.34%. Slightly higher, though, than the S&B optimal level, which is, I think, closer between 3 and 5%. But still, the industry has basically corrected itself, looking at commercial real estate and home loans being balanced out at around 31% of the loan mix, which would lead towards a much more optimal risk going forward. This is another webcast, as I've done before, that I would suggest sending to the regulators. Because when we look at these new capital proposals, is that they're putting weightings on capital in areas that really aren't correct from experience that community banks had. We need to be telling the regulators that we need capital proposals out there that are alternative to Basel III. We need capital proposals that are going to fit our industry and fit it based upon experience. So when we look at this, we want to say to the regulators, we have the facts, and we're looking at it from the perspective of going through one of the worst economic times in U.S. history, and the community banking world should be proud of its results. Have a great week. This is Jay Brew, co-chairman of Seafried and Brew.